This video will contain the following.
When people talk about Stikbot vehicles, it's a really common thing to be talked about in the Stikbot community. I mean, Stikbots have been around for like 9 years, and we really haven't gotten any vehicles. So the idea is often proposed of what vehicles could be, or what they have been, or whatever. So I thought this would be an interesting video to kind of dive into Stikbot vehicles, how they've affected Stikbot movies, official stuff, and what the future may hold. So, yeah. Now, Stikbots and cars, we're going to be mainly talking about cars in this video, but we'll be covering some other stuff too, because that's like a standard. So we need to establish some major scales first. There are practically infinite scales for toys and stuff, but for cars, the main ones are these. Now, the most common scales for like toy cars, like literally easiest to find, are 1/24th, 1/25th, and 1/37th. These ones, like when you go to like the drugstore or something and you see all those cars on like those racks, these are usually the ones you'll see, and they're also can be pretty cheap, sometimes anywhere between $5 to $10. So because these are super widely available, these are often the ones used in a lot of animations, and this includes Stikbot animations. For instance, this car chase that you're seeing right now mainly uses 1/37th and 1/24th, but I think for this mainly 1/37th. So with this, you can kind of see he barely fits in the car, and this is a common theme we'll see. So over the years, we would see 1/37th appear a lot. However, a scale that's more impactful than 1/37th is 1/24th and 1/25th. This has been the standard for years. Not only for die-cast, but mainly for model kits. Like you go to build a model car, it's usually in 1/24th, 1/25th. So that's just kind of the standard. And that's fine, but it doesn't really fit Stikbots. However, it sort of does. Like the 1/37th that we saw earlier, it doesn't fit the Stikbot the best, but it kind of like works in a sort of cartoony way. Well, 1/24th is a slightly better version of that, with some cars working a lot better than others, and helicopters and stuff just not working at all. So, yeah. However, despite it being a not really perfect fit, people went after it for years, mainly because of the video you're seeing now, a behind the scenes for the second place $20,000 2016 contest, where in the behind the scenes, the creator, Cookie Jam, says that basically any scale between 1/18th and 1/24th works, which is true, like I showed you before. It does technically work, but it's not always perfect and can be a little off sometimes. But with 1/24th being more widely available and a lot cheaper, it kind of became a common misconception that 1/24th was sort of your only option. Now, prior to this, in the video, Cookie Jam said that Stikbots, since they're about 3 inches tall, fit these scales, 1/18th being one of them. When you get about 3 inches with Stikbot size and stuff, you basically get a 3 3/4 inch about size for the figure, which is like the closest standard toy matching thing, which gets us to 1/18th. And 1/18th is the correct sort of size for Stikbots, and yeah. To put this in perspective, this mainly makes them align with the original Kenner figures, which were the 3 3/4 inch Star Wars figures, and the 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joes. And the reason why I mention this is because these basically are like the perfect scale for Stikbots, and if you collect other toys, then it's kind of like a nice thing to have, because you can collect G.I. Joes and it fits with the Stikbots, so it's like this 2-in-1 thing. Some recommended toy companies for this scale 1/18th are this company, which I swear after however many years I have known of this brand, I still cannot pronounce their name. And also, surprisingly, Playmobil. Playmobil has perfect scale with Stikbots. I don't know why it's so on point, but it is, so yeah. Now, just as this Clickbot video that's playing right now, I'm kind of praising 1/18th. I mean, 1/18th is the pinnacle of Stikbot scale, but that is not to say that there are not exceptions. In my opinion, the most underrated, well-known toy line is Mask, which was like this really cool series that ran from like 1985 to 1988 or something, and it's basically just transforming vehicles that have like gimmicks, and that's it. And for some reason, despite them being 1/24th, I'd say that they actually fit in them pretty well. But I don't know why. This is, once again, just a random thing and just my opinion. But I just wanted to put that Patrick Bateman thing in some video, and I had no clue how. So, sorry. Okay, now that I got my mass phase out of the way, I feel like we need to discuss official Stikbot vehicles. And, yeah. So this is basically every Stikbot vehicle, except for a couple, but we don't need to, we can forget that for now. And Lightning McQueen. So, yeah. So the first vehicles I'm going to talk about are the farm ones. All these vehicles pretty much came in movie sets, which was pretty much the only way to get vehicles back in the day. And kind of still is now, I guess. But the first vehicle I would like to start off with is the stick truck, or the Stikbot truck, or the stick Chevy, whichever you prefer. And this vehicle has gotten such a bad rap in the community, and while I know it's not perfect, I feel like it's gotten a little more hate than it deserves. It's made out of paper, but I think it looks pretty good and matches the Stikbot style, which we'll get into later. But I wanted to figure out the proper scale with this because, as Stikbot Move has shown, it is not really in the correct scale. So I tried to figure out what this truck looked like the closest thing, and for some reason the only vehicles I could find were literally every pickup truck ever made in 1984. I don't know why, 1983, 1985, they never looked as close to this one as this, in my opinion. But, anyway, so somehow I got the math, and for some reason this is 20 feet. Sure. So I compared it to some other truck models, and I did some math, and I realized that this is not, in fact, the correct scale. This is 1/24th scale. And this was my genuine reaction. It seems like Zing also really likes 1/24th scale. And I get why this was done, because it was probably cheaper to make them this size, especially when you have another vehicle and a whole movie set. But it's just kind of ironic. So looking at the tractor, it's actually not too bad, and I have no complaints. When it came out, it was a little, I think some people thought it was a little complex and kind of counterintuitive to put it together, but overall, I don't really have any issues with it. Next up, we have this bike, which is a very cool bike. Now, I'd like to introduce another scale, which is one of my personal favorite, if not favorite of all time, like scale for toys, which is 1/12th. Now, a convenient part about this scale is that for every 1 inch there is in the figure, it's 1 foot, so it's a super easy conversion. But I think that this bike is about 1/12th. And, you know, it looks a little funky, I won't lie. As Awesome Animations and more said in his review, it is a little huge. But it kind of has like a cool look to it. It's so ridiculous it kind of works. Back to that cartoony thing. And yeah, I kind of like it. You know, in Off the Grid they used 1/12th scale stuff, which works pretty well. And pretty much most like dollhouse items, I'd say 1/12th scale work with Stikbots. But when you get to like proper like full-on cars, that's when it starts to fade a little bit. But for bikes, I'd say it works pretty well. From the space set, we also get this cool little rover thing, but there's not really much to compare it to, and it actually fits in the scale pretty well. And the final thing is this cool Safari Jeep, which we would have gotten in a canceled Safari movie set, which I really wish came out. And someone made a leak video on it, but I can't find it, and I literally just found photos, but I lost them. But besides the wheels being kind of wonky, I feel like that this is probably the best scale Stikbot thing, besides the rover and tractor. So it's kind of sad and ironic that this never came out, but yeah, I'd say this is probably about 1/18th scale. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the papercraft era. And like pretty much a week after they all came out, people started complaining, and I can kind of see why. It's just not as durable. Plastic is just so much better for vehicles and stuff. It just kind of, it doesn't last. So yeah, that kind of concludes it. But what other vehicles have we gotten? Well, we've gotten Megabots, which we can get back to because there's one exception that we'll talk about later. But the other Megabot that I was thinking of is the Turbocycle, which is the red thing. It's like a motorcycle. If you want a better review on it, I'd recommend checking out Bothead's video, which is what's playing right now, where he kind of just dives into it. It's been often regarded as the worst Stikbot Megabot, but I mean, after it went on sale for like $10 to $15, it sold out, probably for the exclusive Stikbot, but I like it. So for the first ever like Stikbot vehicle, like that's made out of plastic, I'd say it's let's move on. With Clickbot Megabots, I'm going to talk about the middle one, which is like the most car thing at all. I don't know. So yeah, this vehicle, it's like it's just off a little bit. It's interesting. It has bigger wheels in the back. I really don't know what to say. It's cool, but it's also very odd. I'm planning to make a video with it, which I think you guys will really enjoy, but that's going to come out in a while, where I'll kind of dive into this thing a bit more. But it's definitely interesting. I think the flying mode, in my opinion, looks better than the vehicle mode, but that's just my opinion. I think that this is what, like, if we were to get more sort of build, like, not like pre-assembled, if we had to build Stikbot and Clickbot vehicles, if we got them, I think that this is probably what they'd look like, or a kind of like lots of gears visible, if that makes sense. Now, for the future and potential of Stikbot vehicles, I think it's important to discuss the style. The style is a big thing. Would you want it to be like a Stikbot is in, like, it's like a self-aware Toy Story sort of scenario where they just drive around toys? Or would it be sort of like a super realistic thing where Stikbot is in their own world? I think there's kind of like a balance between the two, which would be kind of nice, sort of like off the grid in a way. But I was talking to Beige Plaws it's in a podcast interview thing, and it's coming out soon. And basically, we were saying that what would be like, he was saying that the Stikbots, like, it helps to have a sort of cartoony style, or like kind of like a homemade feel, which this is what you're seeing now. This is Bots, a canceled Stikbot Central show, which would have been a parody of Cops. But basically, I think that kind of style, or the style that you're seeing now, would have fit. Where it's like, it definitely resembles the car and you know what it is, but it still has that homemade feel. I think the papercraft stuff resembled this really well, and yeah. So now knowing our style, what vehicles would I choose if I were to make my own Stikbot Vehicles toy line? Well, I've asked the community a lot, and I think that this is a good list. Now, what vehicles would I choose for this first year of the Stikbot Vehicles toy line? Well, I'm going to pick 5 vehicles. It could be released, however, but this is going to be the first series. So, yeah. So I think for the first vehicle, it would be good to have a generic vehicle that could kind of just fit into any scenario. Maybe there'd be even multiple colors. So this is why I'm going with the Nissan Maxima, the first generation. It is a pretty generic vehicle, and it just kind of has all the aspects of literally every generic sedan ever, but it still has that blocky style, and I think to base a vehicle off of this would be really perfect. But if we were to have a hatchback version, I think I want to go with a later 80s Volkswagen Golf as the basis. I think it could also be interesting to have a sort of wood grain wagon, full National Lampoon style, which I think would be really fun and would also kind of fit in that Stikbot style. Now for our next vehicle, I'm thinking of a 2-pack with 2 motorcycles and maybe a sidecar. Now, the first motorcycle would be kind of generic. It just fits in all scenarios. I think it could be like a chopper or something, but I think that something like this kind of fits. The next motorcycle would be more like this, not one of like those heavily modified ones that were used in World War II, but more something like this, which kind of just has modifications on it. This could kind of fit in a post-apocalyptic or off-the-grid scenario, or just a war film, and I think it'd be really good. Then, maybe similar to the Stickfaz one, it could have a hole that connects a sidecar, which would be really cool. I think one of the best parts about choosing the motorcycles would be that you can also sell them in single packs, similarly to how the Cyborgs are done, where there's a 3-pack but also the 6-pack. The next option I think has to be a truck. So for the truck, I'm going to go with a 1979 Chevy. However, I think it would also be cool if it was based off of the original Papercraft one. I think it should also have a detachable, like, back thing. I forgot the name, but I think that would be amazing. And finally, in a perfect world, maybe it could even be towing a boat. And maybe an alternative color scheme could be like a rusted out one. Now, what I think could really benefit this line is if it had like all these, you could just customize it. You could take off wheels, put on bigger ones, put on smaller ones. Just like the back of the truck, and maybe even for a convertible, you could turn it into a convertible or not convertible. But I think it'd be fun if you had wheels. Maybe you could even have wheel packs like this. These are actually 1/18 scale wheels, so they'd be the perfect size for Stikbots. So, maybe you could even like have these compatible with this stuff. I don't know. Now for the final vehicle, I feel like we have to go with a truck, a semi-truck. And yeah, it's a cab over. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that the other vehicles are fine, and there are plenty of other wacky designs we could go with, but I think that the cab over is going to be the best option, and I'll get into why right now. So it wouldn't come as a trailer, it would come with a like flatbed truck, and it would probably be about half this size, being like what you're seeing now. And the reason for this is that it's empty and it could lock in so it wouldn't actually like turn, and then you could kind of build onto it and create something like this, like a tow truck. And maybe for people who wouldn't want to build, you could like buy accessory packs which would just have like all the stuff for the tow and you just attach it onto it. So yeah, here's the first wave. I know that they're all pretty generic, which is kind of the point, but I think that with a Stikbot cartoony aesthetic, it could really work, and I think that this is just a really good start. I think they could eventually go on to more abstract vehicles, but for now, I think this works. If I could add one more vehicle or exchange one, I'd probably add a minivan, which is one that a lot of people have requested from Zing, so yeah. This one here is a 1988 Dodge Caravan, which I think is pretty fitting and could also just pass as a normal van. And the last thing I wanted to add on was a convertible. If I was working at Zing and I had to name it, I'd probably call it the midlife crisis car or something. And I was thinking sort of like a 2006 Corvette, or an older Porsche, or a newer Porsche, really anything. One day I'd also like to add a Jeep, but that's just too much. What Zing should probably do is just take a look at Mask. All those vehicles would literally be perfect. I mean, I literally like pretty much just listed out the vehicles for Mask unintentionally. So yeah, that's my recommendation. But with that said, thank you guys for watching. Zing, if you're watching this, I think these are really good ideas. The biggest issue with them doing something like this is how it would just like, it could be pretty catastrophic. When they launched ClickBots, that was like a pretty risky move, and it didn't it paid off, but like it definitely did cost them something because of COVID, and it was just hard to sell them, especially in stores. So I think doing something like a whole new line would also be hard. So I think it's better if they focus on Zingtanica for now, but I do like the idea of Stikbot vehicles and helicopter motorbike. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next one. Bye.